on 6:30. So I just wanted to give you a quick little bit of information. If you're having any issues with the computers, please go ahead and put information in the chat and I'll do my best to help you out. If you have any questions, please add that to our Q&A section. And we will ask those questions of the presenter at the end. And our presenter tonight is Michael Myers, and he is going to be talking about postcard history medicine in Marshfield, Wisconsin. So if you'd like to take it away, Mike.
Good evening. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you some of the information that I have in regards to postcard history in Marshfield. Something I should start out by telling everybody is that there was a relatively new process back in the late 1800s and the very early 1900s where businesses came through, took pictures of local highlights and made them available to the public. Most times they called them penny postcards, and they could be mailed for a penny. So when people were traveling through different cities, and they would have the opportunity to share what they were seeing with their friends and family from back home. And it also gave an opportunity for people to start collecting things about the history in their own community, which I'm fortunate to have several binders of just local postcards. And the majority of the postcards that were sold in Marshall or that drew the most attention were the things that people could relate to the best, which for the most part was the schools. Any one of the schools have a number of postcards just about them. Including the UW Center and each one of the elementary schools, but also businesses had, if they were significant in the community, if the person taking the pictures and selling the original postcards to distributors saw value in it, they took pictures of different businesses in town too. But without a doubt, beyond any exaggeration, the most postcards, besides the schools, came out of the medical field in Marshfield, most notably St. Joseph's Hospital and the Marshfield Clinic. Now, the title card was made before I finished the project. I probably could have wiped out Marshfield Clinic because I think that's going to be a presentation all in itself. So it'll be a continuation of this one, but for the most part, I think I have a lot of information that I was able to gather, not just in postcards themselves, but background information on just St. Joseph's Hospital. So I hope you enjoy the trip through the medical history of Marshfield, brought on by the postcard that I've been able to obtain. St. Joseph's Hospital started in the late 1880s, 88, 89, 90. And the first established organizational part of it was in late 1880s. Now, there were several locations. Everybody's familiar with where it's located today, but there were several locations considered originally. It might be surprising to some of you that because it was started by a priest at the St. John's Church, one of the original sites of the new hospital that they wanted to establish in Marshfield was in what they called City Park, which is now Columbia Park, because it had close access to the church. That, of course, never happened. One of the other places that they looked at locating was at the end of Cleveland Street, which eventually ended up being Grant School. It's a triangle at the connection of Oak Street and Cleveland Street, Cleveland Avenue, Cleveland Street and Oak Avenue. I'm sorry, city engineers would love that. But then eventually, I think they saw far enough out into the future that they bought into an area just north of that, and it's everything that they've been able to do as far as St. Joseph's Hospital has all taken place on St. Joseph's Avenue, north of Daggy Street. So really, they've come from this to this through the years. Now, I apologize. I'll put a picture in here once in a while just to give you a comparison's sake that you might find interesting, and to give you some idea of the scope of things. There's very little left. There's not anything left of the original hospital. Much of it was torn down in 1985. The center part, I have pictures of that, but it's not a postcard, so I didn't include them. But one of the last remaining parts of the 1960 building, it's very timely that we're talking about this because it's called the South Wing, and I've got my pointer on it here. It's part of a 1960 edition, which included a North edition and a South edition. And the South edition is coming down. They're demolishing it right now as we speak. They're gutting it, and it's going to get hit with a wrecking ball soon to make room for expansion. But from that point on, the original building went in the same direction. It was the center part of the hospital for several years, and we're going to see a few of those expansions as we move on in this presentation. This is the earliest postcard I was able to find in my collection, anyhow, and in other people's collections that I'm familiar with. And it shows the original hospital as it was established. Through the years, several sisters from the Sisters of the Sorrowful Mother came to Marshfield, Catholic nuns, brought here by the St. John's Catholic Church pastor, and established themselves and lived here as they took care of patients in the hospital. And this postcard is dated 1902. Behind it, you can see the chapel. And one of the things about the chapel is it was 40 by 80 feet. And it was it had a 6-foot deep basement. And it housed masses for the sisters. It's available for patients, and it was actually it was a cornerstone for the building itself. You can see from the pictures that it's a very noticeable point with the steeple and everything included with it. Some of the background of the new hospital is that the contract was let in 1990 to a building firm from Madison building firm from Eau Claire. The building will be of solid brick instead of veneered as first proposed. In addition, its 14 by 26 will also be erected. This too will be a solid brick. The foundation has already been completed. The brickwork will be started this week. The contract calls for completion of the building by December of 1990. So it's some time back that the original hospital was built. In the meantime, there were temporary housing for the hospital was established in a home owned by Mr. Dumas on the north side of town, and 5 sisters arrived there, but the number does not include the sister who was in charge of the work. It's expected that she will arrive very soon. So they were put up in temporary quarters, and that's actually a house. That house actually still exists in Marshfield, in one of the neighborhoods on Blodgett Street. Getting back to the picture here, though, one of the things that was used as a draw for business for the hospital, of course, they drew from all the ailments that a growing pioneer community could handle, and everything from diseases to severed limbs to concussions to every ailment you can imagine. But besides just treating those, which a person would expect to have to treat, there was a water cure that was established, and it spread. It was established by one of the priests at the hospital, Father Jock, and they actually had quite a drawing from around the world, especially in the United States. But there was a newspaper article in the New York, in the Milwaukee Journal, which said that the St. Joseph's Hospital in Milwaukee started the cure, and they were wrong. They were sadly wrong. It was in fact started here in Marshfield, and that drew people here for treating of ailments, everything from a sore throat to achy bones, and they sold it as a miracle cure, and so the Marshfield water did the trick, and whatever else went along with it as far as the treatments go. But Father Jock was instrumental in increasing the number of people that would use this facility, and that in itself had a lot to do with actually setting a firm foundation for Marshfield's medical pride and medical history. It was, the whole hospital itself was touted as being one of the finest in the Midwest. Marshfield did appreciate it. Marshfield businesses contributed to it. The city of Marshfield did pretty much anything that the Sisters of the Sorrowful Mother wanted, as far as they had requested a street light, an arc light, to light up the front entrance from the street, which the city did. They also asked that the city extend the city water out to the hospital. Now, it's hard to imagine, but if much of the city surrounded the north end of the city was nearing the proximity of St. John's Church, and a little bit to the north of that this was quite a run of pipe that they would have had to run out there to accommodate the request for water, and in some part due to the additional use of water for the water treatments, the ailment treatments. So Sisters made several requests to the city, and the city was very accommodating in a lot of cases. So one of the things that I mentioned was the chapel. The chapel was added in 1901. The convent was also added to give the nuns a place to live, and to open up rooms in the hospital portion of it. The larger building here is a convent. Marshfield was the worldwide, or the headquarters in the United States for the Sisters of the Sorrowful Mother. They had several establishments like St. Joseph's Hospital throughout the United States, but particularly in Wisconsin. And most of the sisters that worked here and lived here originally came over from Germany. So this is an early version of the convent after it was completed. And several other pictures after this point are going to have three main buildings: the original hospital, as I'm showing with the pointer here, the chapel behind that, and then the convent just to the south and on a hill. It was a 5-story building. The chapel was completed in 1902. The convent was a good addition to the entire campus as things have completed. The newspaper noted several times here and there in 1906 again, where 15 more sisters came direct from Germany, arrived here last week, and are now at St. Joseph's Hospital. They will remain in America and their first duty will be to master the English language. So makes things interesting. The home for the sisters was actually first suggested in 1907, and the convent itself estimated at a cost of about $30,000. And the bids, of course, came in a little bit above that, but part of the building would be 5 stories high, built on a slope to the south, which is the south end. Its dimensions would be in the neighborhood of 50 by 100 feet, and it would have both basement and subcellars. Again, that served a purpose. That building remained as part of the campus. It was one of the first original buildings to be demolished. It remained on the campus until the late 1960s, and it was our early 70s, and it was demolished to make room for possible future expansion, which didn't necessarily go in that direction. But at the time, the sisters were as numerous as they had been in the early 1900s. About that same time, because of the investment in the facilities that they had, the sisters asked the city for a simple fire hydrant, which the city accommodated them. They wanted to be able to protect their investment in the case of a fire, and you can tell by a 5-story building like this for the convent itself that it was one of the biggest buildings in the city, no, beyond none. So they wanted to be able to protect it. 1909, they wanted to expand the hospital again because of growth. And here's a couple of different angles of the original building with the chapel and the convent. Various stages of development around the yard. As time goes on, you can see they planted trees. They had a beautiful fence around it. This is all looking from the south. St. Joseph's Avenue would be past the front part of the building, which is on the left side of the picture. All the rest of it is to the south and to the east of what the original building was. Now, in 1909 and 1910, a new addition was added to the front of the original building. The new addition faced St. Joseph's Avenue. It was a rather large building for what they were used to. 40 by 74 feet, would be 3 stories high, plus the basement and an attic. And according to plans, it was going to fill a void as far as having space available to treat patients. But you can see as time goes on too, the how postcards evolved. There's a variety of different things. The previous one shows a color added tint to the regular photograph, and then sometimes the author of the artist for the card would just make it a simple black and white photo and mark it and sell it. This one shows from St. Joseph's Avenue looking towards the east and towards the front of the new addition with the convent and the chapel in the background. You can see where I mentioned before that the chapel was kind of the most distinguishing part of the facility until it just got overwhelmed and by larger buildings. And here's another one of the newer building. This is St. Joseph's Avenue in the front. Again, a postcard that has been treated and painted, make it more appealing. In 1919, they had added on to the original building, adding the sunrooms, which are very beneficial in treatment of people's ailments. The building along St. Joseph Avenue, again, a big part of the original facility as time went on in the convent. You can't see it in the pictures, but around the building, the sisters were well known in the area for farming. they raised their own chickens, they raised their own cattle. They had gardens that would make people's eyes water. They took such good care of them. But it fed not just the sisters, but it also fed people in the hospital, which was another way that the hospital itself was able to treat people at a reasonable cost, and certainly with a lot less expense. You can see here, 2 of these trees were established after a while. They started to grow. The landscaping, they took a lot of pride in landscaping at the time. Not too much after the building was built. Now this is a different angle. This is a northwest view. A lot of the pictures that you've been seeing on the postcards have been from the south and southwest. This is the front of the building after another addition was added on in the 30s. But it also shows the back side of the original building with chapel in the back and some additional parts of the hospital that were added at the time. This building was added on to at least a dozen times through the years. This was after one of the more major additions. This is the first major addition that was shown in the previous pictures. This part was added on afterwards, and they actually went 5 stories on the original building in the back. This entire center part was part of it was tore down in 1985 to make room for expansion. This is a more relaxed view of the front of the hospital after that last major addition. This is what people knew when they looked at St. Joseph's Hospital. This one's getting into the late 30s and early 40s. I probably moved that one. I got a little too far, but this was after the original addition. Again, the first major addition was just the center part of this, and it was added on to on both ends. And but you can see where as time went on, it's the most photographed building in town. And if you don't have a camera of your own, it's easy to just grab a postcard and send it home or add it to your collection. Again, the convent in the background, cars, busy place, cars along the street. This would have been probably the late 40s, late 30s, early 30s. Judging by the cars, late 20s, early 30s. Telephone poles in the front, light poles wherever the sisters wanted them. Again, this is another view from the southwest, showing a lot of what we had already looked at, but again, the chapel in the addition to the north, onto the addition on the south end. Another angle of it, as time went on, different parts of the building changed. They always had an emergency entrance. They always had a morgue. They always had different things. In this particular case, the morgue was in the lower floor where the doors are on the lowest level. But again, this whole building was a basis for much more expansion as time went on, and we'll see that one of the last big expansions after this was in 1960. But again, these are all just different angles, different views, different postcards that were available. You can see a lot of how it's changed. The whole part of this talk is really postcards. The author gets carried away sometimes in his research and adds probably a little bit more information than what you probably would have expected, but it's good to understand how the hospital grew and how important the hospital was in the community, whether it be through postcards or through history presentations like this. This is one of the operating room in the one of the original buildings. More than likely when this was established. Again, you can see how well maintained the yard is. St. Joseph's Avenue at one time was actually Highway 13. and went by St. Joseph's Hospital. Went up to where we know the water tower at McMillan Street, and then went out towards where Highway 13 is today. But when the state establishes a road for a state highway, it's paved, and this is actually a concrete street, one lane in both directions, and eventually it was expanded. One thing I didn't mention is that the School of Nursing was established. Again, I tried to stay away from everything except the hospital. I didn't mention anything yet about the clinic, but the School of Nursing was very well established, not just the nuns themselves, but the sisters would come over for Germany, actually, besides having to learn English, had to learn the nursing trade. And many of them ended up being instructors, and young ladies from all over, not just Marshfield, but from communities all throughout the state and beyond, were taught the nursing trade at St. Joseph's School of Nursing. Again, that would be even another presentation in itself. So, but again, you see the business as usual, and time for an expansion eventually. Here's the School of Nursing. It is shown in one of the pictures. That also portion of that is being demolished as we speak. It was all that's left of that building was the gymnasium. And that was probably the last thing to be added to this building, the School of Nursing. But that was an important part of the history of Marshfield and of St. Joseph's Hospital. Fun thing about postcards is you can read whatever anybody wrote about them on the back, but when you're looking at them, you can't read that. Well, so this person took the time out to establish where their room was in the hospital and pointed it out for whoever received the postcard for their benefits. So there's another view from the northwest corner. This shows the ambulance entrance going towards the back of the building. That was in effect until the 1960 additions, when it was changed to the south side of the building. This was the emergency entrance at one time. This is looking at the building from the northwest along St. Joseph's Avenue. It's there was one major addition before the 1960 addition, where it established a 5-story building from one end to the other. Actually built it on top of what was already there and established floors where there were no floors before. The 5th floor was actually an attic space, and it was now it's part of the original. Now it's part of the entire building. This was also a major addition, and this was done in the late 1940s and the late 1940s. That took place. There's another view of that. And this is a aerial view, but it was doctored by the artist, and it gives you a little bit better view of things at the time. The nuns had their barn and their chickens and their cattle and their gardens and everything throughout the area. There were still a lot of residential homes that were built up here at the end of what's now Ives Street. Is actually the location of the Marshfield Clinic. And this is another view showing the original chapel, what would have been the original hospital, but it's been added on to make it 5 stories tall like the rest of the building, and the convent and the School of Nursing. These outlying buildings are part of the sisters' farm. Besides just having all that fresh food, they had good homemade pastries and things too that people can remember can tell you about. This is the 1960 edition, 61. This is the South Tower. This is the part that they're demolishing right now, and they're going to be tearing down soon. From that point across to the north, the second edition would have been in the middle. The larger edition that made everything 5 stories was all the way across the front. And in addition to the south building, there was almost an identical size building built on the north end of the building that went from the west to the east towards the back, and actually gave it an L-shaped or a C-shaped design, but made it so much more roomier, more modern, and Postcards picked it up, and somebody sent one home to their folks. Here's another. They're still working on it. You can see the scaffolding here, but this gives you a good idea what the layout of the new additions were. This is a South Tower, and the one over here is called the North Wing. In this building, there were several different. There's a South Wing, there was a North Wing, there's a Northeast Wing, and there was a Center Wing. And this one, the original building would have been in the center part. The chapel is still there, and will be for quite a few more years yet anyhow. The School of Nursing, you can see, is expanded, and the auditorium, the part that's being torn down today, is along this side of the picture. Parking has always been a nightmare, but the city of Marshfield and the hospital cooperated, bought the land that was needed to provide parking, because with increased business at the hospital, of course, there's this increased business for the parking needs for parking. The building in the corner is part of the Marshfield Clinic. It's the Marshfield Clinic Research Center, the original building. Of course, that has expanded today, where it's known as the Lawton Center for Research. And it's part of the Marshfield Clinic campus. Another aerial view of what many of us knew to be the hospital in the 1970s, 60s, and 70s. Because it was in the late 70s that the clinic built a building up here and moved their campus from down on Central Avenue. And it's also when the hospital built its North Tower, north of here, the 8-story building that we know today as St. Joseph's Marshfield Medical Center, MMC. This is not a postcard, but it does show you how things have evolved. If I could go back, the entire center section here was demolished in the 80s. Some expansion took place in the hospital building to allow for an auditorium and allow for parking for that auditorium off of St. Joseph's Avenue in the front, leaving the South Tower across the way from what was the remainder of the hospital. You can see that space in this picture here. You can see the pointer. Here's the South Tower, and this is the open space. The North Wing from 1960 is here. And the hospital came up and built an 8-story building here. It started in the mid 70s. 1976, they were working pretty hot and heavy on the new addition. And at the same time, the Marshfield Clinic came along and built an adjacent building, which really served a good purpose, because so many of the operations, facilities, the personnel, especially doctors from the clinic, would work in the hospital and see their patients in the hospital. So it was a good combination at the time, and it's what we know today as the Marshfield Clinic Health System and the Marshfield Medical Center. This gives you a little bit of an idea of what it looks like today. But this is even an early picture yet, because they haven't expanded to the Laird Center across the road yet, so it's an earlier picture by all means. But it's not a postcard, but it gives you an idea of what the layout is or was. This is not a postcard. There are postcards like this, but this shows you what is known as St. Joseph's Hospital today. And here's another one too, is of the hospital itself, St. Joseph's Hospital. They had an ambulance service. Well, actually, one of the businessmen in town. Sometimes Bear and Lang, it sounds, if my memory serves me correct, was probably a furniture store. But there was a established ambulance service. Eventually, this is a postcard, a picture postcard, real picture postcard, which shows an ambulance service. Before this was taken over by the 2 funeral homes in town, each of them had an ambulance, and eventually the city of Marshfield bought the ambulances from the funeral homes and established their own ambulance service, which operates today. So, of course, the helicopters land where there was never any building before, if we go back to what the postcards show. Again, not a postcard, but this shows actually the construction going on in the hospital at 1976. It shows the original Marshfield Clinic building once it was established up on the hill. And then another major portion here is the critical care center. But I use this picture again to show you the original hospital was in this section, which we saw so many pictures of, so many postcards of, was added on to and eventually demolished. The chapel is still here in the late 80s, early 80s. And then the South Tower, which again, they're going to be demolishing any day now. So another view, not a postcard, but another view of the area, just for perspective. And again, this is a postcard, and it shows the hospital itself, shows the clinic reception area. They called the clinic, but it was part of the hospital. Sun parlor, which were the center section, the original part that was added onto several times, was famous for its sunrooms. I can recall it myself, having walked through there. They had to brighten up a patient's day from whatever they were being treated for at the time. Of course, the operating rooms looked pretty roomy and quite well kept. And this is about as modern as you're going to get. The clinic is expanded from the previous pictures you saw. This is the east wing of the clinic, which is probably the very newest part. And plans are in the works now once the South Tower goes down to expand the facility even more. Now it's all under one roof, technically. The Marshfield Clinic Health Systems owns both their buildings, which was the original Marshfield Clinic, and the St. Joseph Hospital, which is now Marshfield Medical Center. I don't have any more for you. I'm always open to questions, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that people have. Lori?
Thank you very much, Mike. That was very informative. I'm just going to give everybody, I don't have any questions right now.
Okay.
So I'm going to give people a couple of minutes to ask any questions that they have. Go ahead and put those in the Q&A, and then we'll get them on to our presenter.
This is one of my favorite shots right there.
It is a beautiful shot. And for someone who did not grow up in Marshfield, this has been very informative to me, at least.
Oh, good to hear that.
Watching this all develop has been just enlightening.
Well, I've lived here all my life, so it's for me, it's every bit real. And born there. I don't remember that day, but like Forrest Gump would say, I don't remember the day I was born, but uh, my mother worked there. I worked there for a couple of years myself as an orderly. Um, so it's been part of our lives all since the time I've been here. So
I do have a question for you now.
okay.
Mike, in the 1944 photo of the hospital facing St. Joseph Avenue, it looked like a skylight. Do you remember a skylight during the days at the hospital? And just
Okay.
a sidebar of really nice photographs.
Oh, I don't recall a skylight myself anywhere. I mean, I can recall the old center part of the building had an elevator that was as old as the hills. But I don't recall, by the time I worked there, by the time I roamed the hallways, like the orderlies could walk around like they owned the place because we worked everywhere. We were called everywhere to help out. And by then it was 5 stories. The floors were established. There weren't any attics anymore, like in this picture. So I don't recall a skylight, but I don't doubt that maybe it was one. I think the 1940s one that they're talking about might be, beyond that already, but I don't recall the skylights. A lot of lights, otherwise, a lot of windows. They took advantage of the sunlight whenever they could, though. They had to have a good positive aspect as far as healing goes.
Yeah, I have another question for you, and this is from Kim, and she says, thanks, Mike. Have you run across any early images of what is now the Ronald McDonald House?
For this one, I know it's the parsonage. It was the parsonage where the priests all lived. But I did not come across any, but I was zeroed in on, for the most part, the hospital. And if I would have got so carried away, and I would have included the clinic in this one, there still wasn't time in this presentation to do the surrounding stuff, which I know there are some out there, and if I can get my hands on a couple of them, I'll certainly share them for the Ronald McDonald's House for their sake. So I'll keep my eyes peeled for them.
Awesome. That'd be good to see as well. I mean, that seems like it's been a big part of the Marshfield community as well. Any other questions we have for Mike tonight? Okay. When did the clinic consolidate all of its present location, and when did they stop using the other older buildings downtown?
Well, the move took place in the 1976 because they were already established in the original part of the campus up on the north side in 1976. So they moved up here from Central Avenue, moved up to the hill from Central Avenue at that time. Of course, that expanded several times. That's why it would be a presentation in itself, just to go over how the clinic has expanded, not even just from the original established offices on 3rd and Central to the location where Old City Hall is now, but there's actually 3 major expansions that took place down there. But that all culminated in 1976 when they built the first building up on High Street and St. Joseph's Avenue and Oak Street and Calshed Street. So 1976 would have been the date.
And Claudia says, thank you for that answer. An anonymous attendee has asked, where did you gather all the postcards from?
Well, I've got a collection of my own, which I have been doing for as long as I can remember. Thank goodness for eBay. I'd say back in around 1995 or the year 2000, somewhere in there. I was hot and heavy to buy anything that said Marshall on it, and gathered up a lot of the postcards from that. And I've got about 4 different volumes of postcards from parks to houses to medical to schools, churches. This is just the hospital portion of the medical one, but it's a fun hobby to have. I also know other people that have some collections. They've shared some with me, but I didn't use any of those in this presentation. These pretty much all came from my collection. And I know there's other ones out there. One fella, there's a difference in people who collect them, the types of cards that they like to collect. And I prefer the ones that are squeaky clean and unused, although they are fun to read on the back if you get something that somebody wrote. But there's another fellow that wouldn't collect them unless they had writing on the back of them. So John Christner, his name was, and he's a grand poobah of the history collectors of Marshfield, and he'd prefer not to have any that unless they were written on the back. So I'm glad to have the ones I have, though, and I'm always looking to expand on it.
Just as an FYI, the library actually has some postcards as well. I have not perused them for a while, but we have a box of them in our fireplace area. If anybody would like to take a good look and see what we happen to have in there.
I think people would be surprised how many postcards there actually were of different things in the city. I mean, my first recollection of postcards was a rack in the dime store or in the drugstore with all different, and when you're traveling too, sometimes a lot of people, even nowadays, you still try to grab a booklet of postcards rather than just take the pictures themselves and develop them. They keep them for nostalgia's sake. And when these postcards all started in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, cameras weren't as readily available as they are today. Like, they're on your telephone and your telephone's in your pocket. So you got a camera wherever you go. That wasn't the case back then. It was a little more involved to take a picture and to have it developed and to hope that it turned out and then to keep it somehow and or share it with people. But then to be able to have somebody else do that and be able to mail them to people was a big thing at the time.
Well, you've gotten quite a few kudos about your photographs as well as your presentation tonight. So we want to thank you for that. Just one more call for questions. Anyone have anything quick that we can have answered for you? I don't see anybody typing, so I want to thank you very much for being part of our spoken history tonight, and thank all of our participants and attendees. And we'll see you next time.
Lori, if I could say one thing,
oh sure.
The big thing about collecting stuff and be able to do presentations like this is that in my mind anyhow. The whole point is to be able to share stuff with people. Like you mentioned, you're not from around here, so it was an eye opener for you, and that gives me the biggest thrill when when working with Butch and Kim and the rest of them when I have time to do it, to be able to do something like this. Because if anybody didn't know anything about this kind of stuff, then they know something more about it today. Then I'm pretty happy about that. So it's my pleasure to be part of this. It always is.
Awesome. Well,
okay.
Good point from Don. He says it's all about sharing, and thank you for this. And I echo that sentiment. And whoa, hang on just one sec. Oh, just another thank you. And it was presented very well. So I wanted to let you know that as well.
Okay.
And We'll call it a night tonight. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.